Introducing Oakley Meta Vanguard, the new performance AI glasses designed for athletes. With hands-free capture on an action-ready ultra-wide camera, powerful open-ear speakers, and built-in Meta AI that syncs with your Garmin devices for real-time insights while you train. Take your performance to the next level with Oakley Meta Vanguard. Athletic intelligence is here. Learn more on meta.com.
The family that vacations together stays together. At least, that was the plan. Except now, the Dastardly desk clerk is saying he can't confirm your connecting rooms.
Wait, what?
That's right, ma'am. You have rooms 201 and 709.
No, we cannot be 5 floors away from our kids.
The doors have double locks. They'll be fine.
When you want connecting rooms confirmed before you arrive, it matters where you stay.
Welcome to Hilton. I see your connecting rooms are already confirmed.
Hilton, for the stay.
This episode is presented by State Farm. Having insurance isn't the same as having State Farm. It's like needing the protection of an offensive guard on the football field, but getting an elementary school crossing guard. Sure, they're both guards, but you can only trust one to keep your quarterback safe when the game is on the line. So don't settle for just any insurance when there's State Farm. Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there.
Hello everyone, I'm Chris Wynn, and welcome to our weekly episode of On This Week on Howie the Podcast. Unfortunately, we don't have Martin with us today, but we will plough on, however, with this week's spooky episode as we look to finish off October and move into November as we cover from the 28th of October through Halloween, and there have been one or two nightmares built around goings-on on Halloween at Sunderland AFC. I think Simon Grayson might still look back on that date for a start. And then we go through until November the 2nd, because I can't quite believe how quickly this year is going. So to help me, I have your usual suspects. And first up, we have Andrew Smithson. Hello, Andrew.
Hello, you okay?
Yeah, I'm good. Thanks. We're just talking quickly before that, right up our street. Is obviously Founders Week, and we play Z Cars for the intro on this, and there it was at the Stadium of Light.
Yeah, it was lovely. I think quite a few people enjoyed that. This is the first time we've spoken, Chris, since then, and I just thought the whole day was good. The program had like a retro cover on it. I don't know if either of you gents noticed, but on the hoardings and the scoreboard, it kept flashing up the old Roker Park attack, and I was just that was me. That was me gone. The girls were like, "Dad, man, I'm trying to watch the match. I don't need you to keep telling us the story." But yeah, the Z Cars was a lovely way to start the day. And here's a question: did I make this up, lads, or the original scoreboard? Did that stop working because the salt air from the sea got into the electronics? Was that the line from the club?
It sounds about right, doesn't it? I'm sure it was about 1990, 91, didn't it? Where it just clapped out, and then we didn't see it again for a good few years, I think, from memory. Yes. But I assume it didn't do the attack in the 10 minutes where we're under the cosh in the second.
By that point, I was actually paying attention to the game. So I don't know. Yeah, I don't think it was encouraging Wolves to pile on the pressure. But yeah, I thought those little touches were lovely. And seeing as it's Halloween week, which I'd completely forgotten, I assume we are going to talk about a player called William Death, who played for Sunderland, according to all the lads. Kelvin, have you done a deep dive on him, or is it a bit too short notice for that?
Oh, it's going to be a grave situation, that one, I tell you.
Oh, there you go. You've already heard his first quip of the week, because also we have Kelvin Beattie with us. Hello, Kelvin.
Morning, lads. Morning, listeners. Boy, I had some fun on Saturday boring the earth of the young lad next to us, telling him all about Z Cars. He did. I'm saying odds there. the theme tune to Z Cars, man. He's looking at us, what the hell is Z Cars? You know, that's this. And then I get on about our spots the attack, and I'm telling them we used to have a scoreboard that used to tell us to attack. And the crowds, and we went through a spell, I don't know if you can remember this, where, and I don't know whether it was the scoreboard that triggered it, but the crowd would chant, attack, 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 and then defense, defense. You know, like they were going to do what we were going to tell them, you know. Yeah. He looked well bored by the time I'd finished, and the game was only a couple of minutes old. Yeah.
Well, I'm surprised it's not against health and safety or something to tell people to attack people or something like that on a scoreboard. And, you know, there might be a few complaints going into the club. You never know. But actually, I mean, going into all this, Founders Week, absolutely brilliant. And we've seen the new range of retro like tracksuits. I had that tracksuit as well. I left it on Seaburn Rec playing footy, and I was bawling my eyes out as a kid. I left it down there. I went back down and someone had swiped it. Fair play to them, to be fair, because it was a lovely tracksuit top. But I was absolutely gutted. But as well, Andrew, we had Bill Hearn on the pod last week with the release of a new book, Got Not Got Sunderland, little book of Mackem memories, and like the scoreboards in there, the gantries in there. The one of the daft little things I didn't mention on that pod was do you remember there was a time period in the early 90s, I think, when everyone had the strips in the back of their car, and the little tiny strips. Yes. But it's absolutely brilliant. But it seems like all these things are kind of coming back in, and I don't know if I asked Bill Hearn this, Andrew, but do you think it's like a slight on football at the minute, that everyone looking back more than the game at the moment?
Oh, I don't know. I think, that there is always a romanticism around the old days, and particularly whatever era you grew up in. So, for example, those kits in the back of car windows and what have you, I had one in my bedroom window, which it was that sun damage. By the end of it, it looked like Sunderland played in pink and cream stripes. And by the way, commiserations on losing that tracksuit top, because I would not have.
It still hurts. Genuinely still hurts.
I can imagine. But I reckon there's somebody listening to this who found that on Seaburn Rec and went, that's mine now. Sorry.
Yeah. We've got it as well.
Yeah. But yes, we do always enjoy a bit of a roll back through the memories. I'm really looking forward to seeing that book by Bill Hearn. It looks fantastic, and I just think it's important that everybody remembers that it's because of our podcast and us talking about the memories that Sunderland history is now, de rigueur again, and everybody wants to talk about the old days. I think we should take credit for that and nobody else.
Well, I wasn't going to say it, so I'll let you say it, Andrew. But one thing about those the strips in the back of the car, you had to be careful where you park the car. That was the only thing with those things. But Kelvin, like I said, we went through all of those things and because my dad used to tell me about the cigarette cards and then the chewing gum cards and all this. And he talked about this explosion after the World Cup in '66, which I thought I'd just crowbar into the pod there, Kelvin, because you like it so much. But But what was the first things you kind of collected now? Because we went through, the Subutio and the cards and all this sort of stuff. What were your first things that you started collecting?
When I was sitting listening to you, because I stuck that pod on yesterday, and with Bill Hearn, and was walking round. Where was I yesterday? Sampling the delights of the River Derwent. I was walking up the River Derwent.
Kelvin. Stop trying to kid onto your wife that you've been behaving yourself and going on healthy walks. You're probably in some dingy pub or something. Come on, tell us the truth. What were you really up to?
Oh, yeah, there's no dingy pubs in concert, man. Come on.
Sorry.
But it it was a great listen, first of all, and he was really interesting, Bill, wasn't he? I love that kind of ability to dredge all that stuff up and make sense of it, But what did strike us when I was listening to it, one of my first memories was Esso getting cards from the garage, and I'm sure there were Esso.
That's it. That's in the book.
Yeah, that was that's what I was playing with. But I don't trust my memory sometimes, so I'm thinking, was that me, or was that one of my, because I'm the eldest, was it one of my younger brothers that had these flying round the house? I can definitely remember fighting over the cards in the house. And I had a brother that was a year younger than me that used to nick mine, and would tussled a few times in the bedroom over him nicking me football cards, So that was one of the memories, but it was great. Subutio,
Yeah.
the Subutio stuff. I used to try and paint me figures, because I used to have like Airfix paint.
Yeah.
And I had this idea that I could paint a Sunderland strip on these Subutio figures that looked like they'd been macheted on Halloween. It was horrible. That was another memory. The paint obviously wasn't the right stuff for the Subutio figures. It was, but I just chuckled. I just chuckled all the way around me walk listening to that stuff. Brilliant, isn't it? It's brilliant.
Yeah, some brilliant memories. Like I said, one of the strangest ones. I didn't expect it in the book because I expected strips and things. But when I came to a big section on Spot the Ball, it's like, bloody hell! I used to watch my dad every week do those tiny little crosses, and he never won anything, never won a penny off bloody Spot the Ball, and he did it every bloody week. But yeah, I mean, and Andrew, just kind of on all that, because you would have been, we're similar generation, very close in age. I'm not saying how old that is, but we're very close in age. But you'll have done the same as me, staring at Subutio and Joseph's back in the day in town.
Yes, without doubt. That was the big Christmas present for me one year, was getting the starter pack, where you got a couple of generic teams in there, and the folded up pit. And then from that point onwards, there was always, I think you could get a Subutio catalogue as well. So if I wasn't in town staring at the Subutio collection, I was in my house staring at the collection. And I had everything. I had the little TV gantry and the stands, scoreboard, and I definitely had at least one actual Sunderland set of players. Just great memories. I don't think I actually ever played Subutio. I just liked setting up the ground and going through the routine of that.
He mentioned there's two types of players: people who actually played the game and people who just set it up and looked at it.
I was definitely the second.
I was absolutely the same. Were you a player, Kelvin?
I never used me Sunderland team. When I played, I never used them because I didn't want to get the strips dirty.
Well, I bet you they'd look like they'd just gone 90 minutes with Dunrevy's Leeds, had they?
Oh, man. Yeah, absolutely.
Kick the hell. But just quickly, because we're going to cover Halloween, Kelvin, what was Halloween to you? Because my memory is my mum used to get a bloody turnip or a swede and hollow it out. I mean, what was your memories of Halloween as a kid?
Yeah, turnip, a swede is, that was for the posh folks on the I didn't know what a Swede was. I thought it was some kind of Scandinavian Halloween link-up. I think I was 12 before I realised I used to think it was posh folks' food. We used to would get a turnip, if you know what I mean, from... There was a field on the edge of the estate. We used to get.
Now I get what you mean, Kelvin. I was wondering for a second.
and spend quite a lot of time hollowing them out. We used to put all the inside scrapings into a big pot, and my mother used to make soup with it and stuff like that.
Well, that's
So
interesting.
well, we were recycling back in the blooming early 60s, sus, man. Hey, now new to us in Morpeth.
Well, that's it. I mean, and Andrew, you'll have been like me around the streets of Fulham with your turnip and walking around, bit of string attached. Happy days.
I was a miserable kid. I don't like Halloween now. I wasn't keen on it then, and I used to sit in the house and look at people going up and down the street and just think, "You're all right." Listen, the first Swede I saw was Stefan Schwartz, and genuinely, that's. And when you're saying this is how sad I am, when you're talking about turnip, I'm going through puns. So I'm thinking, is Chris Turnip a good enough pun to raise on the pod or not? Michael Turnip. So I didn't enjoy Halloween, Chris. I must admit, I was a bit of a misery gut even back then. But if people want to hit us with Halloween puns, I'm all for that. I'm down with that. If not the trick or treat.
Well, I'll just be pedantic because Jan Eriksson came before Stefan Schwarz, so I'll just throw that one out there to you, Andrew.
Fair point.
But anyway, well, let's get into it because we need the quiz question from last week because everyone's waiting for it, of course.
Yes, sadly, if I had thought on, I would have come up with a question about William Death, who, as we all know, according to all the lads, played 56 appearances for Sunderland, starting in 1924. But yes, we all know about him, so we don't need to worry about that too much.
Martin told a brilliant story about his gran when it came over the radio about death, and he was like, "Oh God, what's happened there?" But anyway, sorry, I digress.
I've seen Sunderland die a few deaths on the picture over the years. They've been pretty scary. Right, yes. The quiz question. The 1st of November 1961, we took on Middlesbrough in a one-off competition. And I asked, what was this competition called? Do you have... To be honest, Kelvin, it didn't really capture the imagination. So even though you were going to games later in the decade, it wasn't one that was talked about much. It was called the Cock of the North tournament.
Ooh, I have heard of that before.
Kelvin's won that a few times, I think.
Oh, steady. Yeah, I have.
Sorry, Kelvin.
I have heard of that one before. The Cock of the North tournament.
I thought you were going to say that, so I thought I'd get in
there. There used to be we used to sing a chant in the early 70s about us being the Sunderland being the Cock of the North. It used to be a chant. My head's gonna be playing with that now for the rest of the pod. I'm trying to remember what the tune was and the words and stuff. Yeah. Aye. Good one.
Yeah.
Well, the
question.
The Cock of the North tournament, as I say, it was a one-off played in the 1961-62 season. It was between ourselves, Middlesbrough, and Newcastle. And I thought if anyone was going to do a Cock of the North joke, I thought it would have been about the Mags. But Chris, to be fair, got in quicker than me.
Well, just knowing how quick Kelvin is, I thought I had to get in there. Who knows where he was going to aim at that? So I retaliated first. I'll put it that way.
Well, who was it used to do that? Was it? It might have been Joe Bolton, who said they got their retaliation in first. But yeah, the game on the first was at Roker Park. It was our final outing in that competition. It finished 2-2 on that day. Sunderland didn't actually win a match in the tournament. We played each team home and away. And we actually finished bottom of this little mini group. It was Middlesbrough that won the tournament. Newcastle obviously finished in the middle. However, in the league that season, it was switched completely the other way round. We finished the higher of the three teams in the division, which I think probably counted for more than this tournament. It was expected to be like a real money spinner. You know, you think Sunderland against Newcastle, Sunderland against Middlesbrough, that's going to draw the crowds in. I think the fact that it wasn't a serious competition meant the crowds weren't that impressive, and that's why they didn't bother with it again. Interestingly, though, considering the clubs are often at loggerheads with each other, the gate receipts that were made from each game were split equally between all three parties, whether that team was involved in that game or not. So when we played Borough at home on the 1st of November, the Mags actually got some of those takens. So you can see why the clubs wanted it. They thought it might have been a bit of a boost to the coffers, but it never really took off that one, and that is why we no longer talk about the Cup of the North.
Yeah,
and for other reasons.
Of course. I don't think you get away with that now, of course.
Yeah.
But yeah, up there with and it's actually a nice tie-in because I've got another thing today where it's our first appearance in another tournament, so we'll come on to that. But look, let's get into our days because we'll go into October the 27th, and we'll begin in 1888 when Sunderland striker John Breckenridge scored Sunderland's first hat-trick in the FA Cup when we won 5-3 at home over Elswick Rangers. In 1928, on the 27th, Dave Halliday scored 2 to help Sunderland beat Newcastle 5-2 in front of just over 50,000 at Roker Park. And we come into 1950, and this is our first kind of big feature for today because Welsh international centre-forward Trevor Ford signed on the dotted line from Aston Villa for then a British record fee of £29,500. And Andrew, you're going to tell us all about him.
I am, yes, you're quite right, mate. He did. We signed Trevor Ford on the 27th. It was a bit of a saga, though, so I'm going to take you through the full story. Not the first time a transfer to Sunderland has been a bit of a saga. They not recently, but in the past, they used to get dragged out. And of course, Kelvin will know we talked about Cowies a bit last week. So I thought it was only right that we would now talk about Ford, because Cowies Ford was probably one of the biggest dealerships I remember. But it wasn't a Cortina or an Escort or a Sierra. It was Trevor Ford we signed. As Chris says, it was a British record fee. Trevor Ford was big news. This is like us signing a star player nowadays. He'd been at Villa for a couple of years.
Like Xhaka, maybe?
Yes. Well, yeah, exactly. Now, I tell you what, Trevor Ford was apparently able to look after himself. I wouldn't mind seeing those two clash on the pitch. That would be a bit of a battle. But yeah, Ford had been at Villa for a few years. He was banging in the goals. I think he had a pretty much a 1 goal in every 2 game record. He was already established on the international scene, playing for Wales. And this really drove home to me how good he was. Trevor Ford was from Swansea, and so too was John Charles. Now, John Charles, one of the most famous footballers in British history, described Ford as his idol. So this is the caliber we're talking about. He wasn't, Ford was easily up there with the very best strikers at the time. So you can see why Sunderland were desperate to get him. As I say, it was a bit of a saga. It had been rumbling on for a canny while. And on the 16th of October, the national press had claimed Sunderland are touring the country with a £50,000 cheque ready to spend. So that was, in those times, that was pretty attention-grabbing stuff. Argus, who we often mention on these pods, though, was trying to dampen down the expectation. on the 16th of October in the what was then the Daily Echo and Shipping Gazette, he debunked this claim from the national press, describing it as Tommy rot. Now, not quite sure what Tommy rot is. Any ideas on that one, Kelvin?
Me mother used to say that to me. You're talking Tommy rot. You know, it's just a way of saying you're talking a load of rubbish.
Yeah. Fair dues. Well, Argus said, "What Tommy rot? No such thing is happening." So he killed rumours that we were wandering around with 50k in our back pocket, desperate to sign anybody. He also pointed out that rumours of an approach for a Stoke City player who apparently was an England international, but I don't recognise the name, Neil Franklin. He was supposedly coming to Sunderland, but Argus said, no, that's just paper talk. There's no substance to that rumour. However, Sunderland are interested in Ford and had been given permission by Aston Villa to speak to him about a potential transfer. Seemingly, Ford was on the transfer list at his own request, so that's what sparked it all. The fact about whether Sunderland were willing to spend 50,000 or not was up for debate, and certainly this Neil Franklin, who, I mean, does that name ring any bells with you, Kelvin? Is it a player? He had a decent record for England on paper, and had he come to Sunderland, we might have known a bit more about him. But yeah, that was the 16th. We're not going for Franklin. We're not going to be spending upwards of 50,000 on players. However, Ford could be somebody we go for. The 17th of October, the day after, now Argus is presumably by now being given information by the club to get out there, because there's still reports doing the rounds in the national press. They were suggesting that Dickie Davis was going to be part of an exchange deal for Ford. Now, Davis was a popular player at Sunderland, so the club wouldn't have been too impressed about that type of story getting out, because, of course, if you're trying to strengthen the team, you don't want to lose one of your better players, and that would have caused a bit of a stink. So they've presumably been on the phone to Argus and said, could you do us a favour and just put out a bit of a story debunking that suggestion. We then go to the 18th, and by now we're being told that Villa directors have had a meeting, but haven't made a decision as to who they are happy to sell to, because by this point there's several clubs thought to be interested. We learn a little bit about why Ford wanted to be on the transfer list. Seemingly, he was keen to move closer to Wales so that he could help run his mother-in-law's business interests. We often talk at the time about players in that era. Football wasn't enough of an earner, so they had to have a day job to pay the bills. So yeah, there was this suggestion that he needed to attend to family duties. Swansea, his former club, couldn't afford him. Cardiff City, however, did have the funds and were one of the clubs keen on him. But of course, the whole Swansea-Cardiff rivalry, I think, maybe scuppered that at the time. Also on the 18th, whilst Ford's future hadn't been decided, gents, we did sign Billy Bingham for around £8,000. Bill Murray, the Sunderland manager, had watched him play for the Irish League at Blackpool earlier on in the week. We'd apparently already made inquiries for him earlier in the year, watched him a couple of times before this Irish League exhibition match. But we'd seen enough, we were happy to go and sign him. He was more at that stage, though, one for the future. We've spoken about Billy Bingham. He did become a brilliant player for us. But at that point, he was a prospect, whereas Ford was very much an established name. After signing Bingham, things did go quiet for a couple of days. I don't know if people just thought, well, that's that. Sunderland aren't going to bother spending any more money. But then on the 23rd, things picked up again. There was a story that Ford was likely to go to Chelsea, and seemingly his wife was open to this idea because even though they were living in Birmingham, it was apparently easier to get to Wales from London and where her parents lived. I mean, I don't know. I don't know how that works.
Surprised by that.
Yeah. It doesn't really make sense. But hey, listen, who knows with the trains? I mean, sometimes they get criticised these days. Perhaps back in those days, the services were even more confusing. But
surely
yeah,
not. surely it was the trains were better then. I would guess.
Yeah, very, very possibly. It seemed a little bit odd, that one. Was it David Unsworth who moved to, it might have been to Aston Villa. And then when they moved there within a day, his wife realised, oh, Birmingham isn't where I thought it was. So then they then had to cancel that deal and go somewhere else. I doubt Mrs. Unsworth is listening to this pod, but if I've got that wrong, please accept my apologies. But yeah, suddenly from nowhere.
I'll not name a player, but I know someone who got talking to a player who came up from London just a few years ago, and came up to Sunderland. And in the first week, someone kind of bumped into him and started talking to him on the seafront. And in this conversation, he said, "I didn't realise Sunderland was on the coast. I didn't realise it had a beach or anything like
that." Yeah, don't mention names, but
no.
Drop us a text with that one, Chris. I'd like to know who that was. But yeah, so there you go. The transport infrastructure back in the 50s made Chelsea suddenly become the front runners. However, word was also coming out of Roker Park that the hierarchy were more than happy for Ford to take over his mother-in-law's, what was described by now as a licensed business. So she presumably ran a pub or an off-license or something along those lines. One of the hitches now, though, was that Ford himself was no longer sure if he wanted to do this or if he just wanted to concentrate on football. So you've got all of these complications going on in the background. You're not just negotiating with the player, you're negotiating with his family and his in-laws, which, it complicates matters. So that was on the 23rd. The 24th, Villa announced that Ford had not come back to training since being on international duty, and that they had been made aware that he was due that day to meet several Football League managers. So we've already had preliminary talks with him. We've already made it known that we would be willing for him to play for us, but still oversee the family business. There's other clubs now in the mix, including Chelsea, but we are still pushing to try and get him.
I think Roy Keane would have given up by that point.
Very possibly. Although there wasn't any answer machine messages back then, so that was Savage, wasn't it? That was Robbie Savage who upset Keane with that one. So yeah, no answer machine messages, just it was all done face to face. On the 25th, the papers are loving this, of course, because it's nice, easy copy. Even back then, people enjoy reading a story that has a bit of to and fro to it, a willy won't-y aspect to it. On the 25th, it's being reported that Murray was one of those Football League managers that was due to speak to Ford. He, if we believe the press, spoke quite in depth with Mr. and Mrs. Ford, presumably thought he was getting somewhere, so much so that he missed a presentation back at Roker Park that was put on by director and future chairman Sid Collings that he'd put on. He'd apparently put on a big do for the players, club staff, their families, and he was showing city camera footage taken whilst he'd been in Istanbul recently. Now, the club had been on a tour in Istanbul at the end of the previous season, so I don't know if that was what the footage was of, or if he'd been back to Turkey more recently. So yeah, everybody was gathered somewhere in the main stand watching this footage. The club also put on highlights from the 1937 FA Cup final and highlights from the two most recent cup finals. So it seems like a bit of a... I'm not sure the players' wives would have been too interested in watching old football highlights, but maybe the footage of what they got up to when they went abroad a few months earlier might have interested them. But Murray had to miss that scintillating evening out because he was down in Birmingham, still thrashing out these negotiations. 26th of October, we are going to get to a signing, don't worry, I will eventually get us there. On the 26th...
It was a saga, though, you weren't wrong.
It was. Ford had now come back for training at Aston Villa, but because of the uncertainty around him, he wasn't picked for their first team, and he wasn't even picked for their reserves that weekend. So maybe Villa are starting to get the hump with him. They're getting a bit sick of this whole uncertainty. As for Sunderland, we are now believed to have finally agreed a fee for him. Murray, there definitely wasn't any answer phone messages, because Murray apparently on the 26th rushed back to the northeast to tell the directors this at a board meeting. He then jumped back in his car and travelled all the way back down to Birmingham. Presumably the trains in and out of Birmingham were even worse than the trains in and out of Swansea at that time. So I don't know why he didn't ring, but he's travelled back home, told the board, yeah, it's all looking good. We might sign this fella. He's turned back around, headed straight back for Birmingham. 27th of October, the day he actually signs, if you read the 6 o'clock edition of the Echo, you would have been under the impression the deal was off. So just another twist in the story. We'd seemingly offered him a part-time job with the offer of a full-time appointment when he stopped playing. It had been intimated to us that this would have met his satisfaction, but seemingly Ford had said, "Now I've changed my mind," and spent the evening of the 26th in the cinema. So there's his soon-to-be manager rushing back down from Sunderland, hoping to tie this up. He's arrived. He's gone, right, where's my new striker? Oh, he's gone out to the cinema, sorry. So Bill Murray, now at a loose end, he's obviously sick of it all. So he decides, oh, well, I'm in the area. I'll just start talking to West Brom about one of their players instead. And in the Echo on the 27th, readers are now being told that a player called Dave Walsh is going to be signing for us. Now, Dave Walsh's name had not been mentioned at any point previously to this. And now suddenly he's going to be our new striker. So, you know, it's all a bit confusing. Everyone goes to bed thinking, right, well, that's the end of that. The next day, the 28th, when Sunderland are due to play Chelsea, and it turns out he had signed. He had signed on the Friday, and they'd done it in time for him to play at Stamford Bridge. Obviously, Chelsea had been linked with him. He's this big-name player. At Chelsea, suddenly, there's an extra couple of thousand on the gate. When Ford turns up at the ground, he's handed a stack of telegrams from well-wishers. Now, I can't think of many opposition players who turn up outside the ground and get given a load of well-wishes from observers. So, I mean, that was an interesting little aside. He'd met the club captain, Willie Watson, and the chairman, Ted Ditchburn. And serious apologies to the Ditchburn family for mangling that name. He'd met them at the club's base in King's Cross earlier that morning at what was called the Great Northern Hotel. there's a photo of him shaking hands with Ditchburn, bizarrely, on the front page of the Northern Daily Mail in Hartlepool. Now, I know I've said before that the Hartlepool newspaper and the Echo, I think, were owned by the same company. But why the photo of a Sunderland player is front page news in Hartlepool, I'm not quite sure. I think it perhaps just points to this fact that it was such an ongoing story, and it was a British record transfer we'd just paid. It was national news. It wasn't just Sunderland fans interested in this. Everybody had been following the story, like you two lads have now had to for the last 15 minutes as I've droned on. Even then, though, it wasn't straightforward. Apparently, the last couple of minutes before the deadline, we tried to register him with the Football League and the Football Association, but there was problems. Villa, by mistake, had failed to sign the transfer forms. The Football Association were claiming their copies of the paperwork hadn't landed with them. So there was this mad dash, a load of phone calls and telegrams being sent. I believe the post office had to provide some sort of proof that they had received the forms from Sunderland and sent them on, just that they'd presumably got lost in transit somewhere along the line. So even when everything's done and dusted, it's taken an absolute age and a load of additional effort to get it done. Nevertheless, it is sorted. He gets to play against Chelsea. There's these big crowd here all expecting him to play well. Wouldn't you know, in the first half, he gets a knock to his knee. So he's struggling. After all of that, typical Sunderland, he goes and gets himself crocked. Stanley Ritson was a Sunderland director at the time, watching the game. Now, he had studied at King's College in London and was a hugely respected surgeon at the time. So he gets called down to the changing rooms at half-time to give Trevor Ford the once-over. And he's probably thinking, so we've just signed off this record transfer fee for this player, and I'm having to go down now to see if he's blooming injured. He says, do you know what? He can play on. So I don't know. I don't know if that was genuine or not, or if he's thinking, I don't want to have to sit in the boardroom telling my colleagues that I've just written off £29,000 worth of player. So yeah, he ends up playing the game, carrying this injury. Ritson, by the way, ended up being vice president of the club when he retired. In 1973, he was awarded an OBE. So he was a very highly thought of figure in medicine, and presumably his diagnosis was made for the right reasons on Trevor Ford. He didn't want to have to bear the bad news to the manager that he was going to have to take his new star player off. But yeah, the second half against Chelsea, we've got Ford carrying a knock. Ivor Broadis was also injured in the game, and now he was basically a passenger. You know, in the times before substitutions, if you were knackered, it was tough luck. It was just kind of like go and stand on the wing and be a nuisance as best you can. We end up losing 3-0. It's a bit of a disappointment after all the excitement of the signing. And it's not until the home game next week, which we might touch on in that episode, where we see Ford really hit the ground and start doing his thing for Sunderland. So yeah, we'll probably talk about that game next week. In general, sorry, Chris.
We'll probably get into more about his relationship with Shaq and stuff that. Then,
yeah. In general, he did have this feud with Shackleton, but prior to him signing, all of these reports about Ford potentially coming to Sunderland, everybody's excited and saying, and by the way, if Ford does come to Sunderland, fans can look forward to this amazing link up with Shackleton. That never quite happened. We do know, though, don't we, that Ford did get a job, quote, selling cars. Although whether he was selling them or whether he was just driving around wearside in them, upsetting some of his teammates, we're not quite sure. When he retired, he went into car sales full time, both in Wales and back in Sunderland. So he came up to Sunderland and did eventually have a full-time job selling cars. Whether that was the one that Sunderland had originally lined up for him or not, we don't know. But I just wonder, was this one of those things where the thrill of the chase was the biggest thing? Because Trevor Ford was a phenomenal striker and he had a brilliant record for us. But it didn't work with Shackleton. We didn't get any of the trophies we thought this team was capable of getting. And although he'd left the club, he did then get embroiled in that illegal payments scandal later on in the decade. So, fascinating story about how he came here. Sadly, it's one of those where you wonder, did it quite pay off in the long run? He was brilliant for us and his goals record was fantastic, but it didn't quite lead Sunderland to becoming the trophy winners we hoped it would, sadly.
Yeah, we were the original Galacticos. That's what
Exactly,
what we can say. Well, I was just looking actually, and apparently 29,500 in 1950 has the same purchasing power today is approximately £1.3 million.
Big, yeah, big figures we're talking about.
Yeah, so which is just shows the scale of money we were spending. But that's brilliant, and I'm sure we'll talk about more about Trevor Ford as we get into some of these games as well, especially that relationship with Shackleton as well, because that's absolutely fascinating. Because but I think we'll save that one for another day, because I think that's another story in itself.
Purina believes no one should have to make the impossible choice between their own safety and their pets. But nearly half of domestic abuse survivors delay leaving because they can't bring their pets with them. Through the Purple Leash Project, Purina is helping create more pet-friendly domestic violence shelters so survivors and their pets can escape and heal together. Visit purina.com/purple to learn more.
This episode is brought to you by Indeed. When your computer breaks, you don't wait for it to magically start working again. You fix the problem. So why wait to hire the people your company desperately needs? Use Indeed's sponsored jobs to hire top talent fast. And even better, you only pay for results. There's no need to wait. Speed up your hiring with a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply.
Finished training for the day? Time to fight post-workout fatigue with Core Power Protein Shakes. They're packed with 26 grams of high-quality protein to build muscle and electrolytes to help hydrate. The nutrition you need to help your body replenish, rebuild, and repair post-workout so you can power on to the next one. Champion your recovery with Core Power. Visit corepower.com to learn more.
So we'll get into the rest of the items we've got for October the 27th, because in 1965, a crowd of 31,828 turned out for Brian Clough's testimonial at Roker Park against a Newcastle United select 11. Brian Clough scored 2, of course, as he would. One of those a penalty. And then half an hour later, it was announced that he was taking the Hartlepool's job. But I was going to ask you, Kelvin, I'm not sure if you know much of the backstory about it, because to be honest, I don't. I've read up on it a few others today, but was this a strange thing that he was given a testimonial, that they agreed to it, or was this the done thing for injured players?
So that game took place before I saw my very first game, but it was that season, and I can remember sort of that testimonial coming up in conversation in terms of how many people attended, and it was a record for a testimonial for quite a long time at Sunderland. I have a fancy, unless one of our listeners is going to put me right, that we would be into the Stadium of Light era, and Quinn or Kevin Bowles. I can't remember which came first. I've lost the plot here. But I think it might have been their testimonials that beat that attendance for the testimonial. It was an odd, definitely when you read back, it was an odd period and an odd situation, because they did grant him this testimonial, but he had a fractious relationship with some of these team colleagues, and he had a little bit of trouble sort of not getting people to turn out, but getting the people that he really wanted play. But I mean, this lad was just loved by the fans. They loved him, and they turned out for that game. You know, the team. Charlie Hurley was away on international duty, and Lenny Ashurst, he'd had quite a public spat with Ashurst, and probably when you read around it, you'd think he probably unfairly blamed Ashurst to a degree. It was Ashurst's pass that he was chasing when he got his career-ending injury against Bury, and he seems to have partially blamed him for it. But I mean, Ashurst was as abrasive a character, as every bit as abrasive as Clough was, you know. So he's going to go toe to toe with Clough and tell him to, you know, bug off. And he wasn't. It didn't seem that it bothered him too much that he didn't roll in and play his part in the testimonial. So Hurley and Ashurst were both missing from that game. But he did manage to get, I think, Jody Armstrong at Arsenal, and George Eastham, who'd played for Newcastle, turned out for Newcastle. Ian St. John came and played, and Tony Hateley, Mark Hateley's dad. He was a I mean, I saw him play, Tony Hateley. He was a great, big but clever centre forward. Him.
That's how you could describe Mark, really, couldn't you? Similar.
Do you know what? I remember having a debate about this, and it's just one of them stupid things that you sort of end up arguing about and say there's nothing bloody rational about this debate. But you know, was the dad a better player? Was the son a better player? And I don't know, I think I'd been on the Theakston's Old Peculiar, you know, because I remember passionately arguing that the father, Tony, was the better player. And in the cold light of day, I don't actually believe that. But so, and I never drank Theakston's Old Peculiar again. But he was a good player, Tony Hateley, and George Eastham as well, who played at Newcastle and fallen out with Newcastle, and then landed at Arsenal, and later played at Stoke. I think George Eastham in League Cup winning team, I'm sure, and he was a highly regarded player in the Northeast, you know. So they did manage to bring in some decent players for the opposition. But I mean, we had Frankie Clark was playing for Newcastle in terms of links there. Frank Clark played, and it was like the Newcastle back five, and then Jody Armstrong, Ian St. John, Tony Hateley, George Eastham, and a lad called Colin Dobson played. And then Sunderland had the goalkeeper was McLaughlin, Irwin, Park, Harvey, McNabb, Baxter played. And then Ambrose Fogarty, who was then playing at Hartlepool, he turned up to watch the game, but ended up playing because Dave Halliwell, who was an England international winger who was playing for us at the time, I think he got injured, and Ambrose Fogarty rolled in. He probably had to borrow somebody's boots to play unless he had an inkling that something was going to go off there. Geordie Hurd, Brian Clough, and do you know what? It was the first sight that the Roker Park crowd got of Neil Martin as well. We'd just bought him from Hibernian, and he played a half of this game. Big John Moore came on for him in the second half. A young lad, young centre forward up from our youth team.
Was it Gary Moore?
I thought there were yeah, because we had a couple of boys called Moore.
Yeah.
Was it John or Gary?
John Moore played. Was it late 80s? We had
Later,
John Moore?
yeah. There were two. There might have been three Moores on our books at the time. Yeah. But anyway, a lad called Moore
Yeah.
up from the youth team. And the interesting thing about that, of course, would be that Clough had coached him in the youth team. Clough had worked with Bill. Now, what was that older boy's name? The coach that he worked with, Bill Wright, was it? Clough worked with him. That boy was
Bill Scott.
Bill Scott, yeah. And Clough, George Hardwick had suggested that Clough coach help out with the youth team, and they got to the semi-final of the FA Youth Cup for the first time. But that was a cracking team. That youth team that he coached, with the likes of Todd, Suggett, O'Hare, Hughes, Kerr, Derek Foster, and a canny fullback that would have played a few more games if Irwin and Ashurst hadn't been so established. A lad called Jimmy Shoulder was in that team. So he coached them, and it was a funny period because the club were waiting on the insurance money coming through for Clough. They wanted that money, the insurance money, and I think by the following April, George Hardwick had actually done all right at the club that season. There were a lot of people thinking that he would get the job. And according to George Hardwick, he'd said that he'd told the board Clough would be his number 2. And because of the Hardwick looking back on that, I think probably thinks that was maybe not a good idea if he'd thought that through, given his relationship, the fractious relationship that Clough had with the directors. And it's interesting, the what you say is right. Every story I've seen about this was that there was an announcement made that he was going to be the Hartlepool's manager. But it was actually Keith Collins, I think, that let that out the bag in the refreshment room afterwards. I think Collins had let that out the bag and said that he was going there. So Clough responded with something like, keep your eye on us, get yourself down to Hartlepool, we're going to play some good football, and in 3 years' time we'll be playing you. And apparently Keith Collins shot back at him and said, in which division? So you get a sense of there wasn't a lot of love lost there, I don't think, in that. But again, I say this every week, I would have loved to have been there for that one. I would have loved to have seen that, and it would have been nice to have an invite to the refreshment room and hear that exchange going on as well.
I think they used to sell Theakstons at that time, so you might have been well in. Just an apology, Kelvin. You mentioned a trainer called Bill Wright, and I suggested it might be Bill Scott. I've had a think. I think that's a combination of two. I think Arthur Wright, the former player, and Bill Scott were both coaches at the club at that time. So it could be that they were both involved.
Yeah. Whichever one it was, and this is my memory playing tricks with us. It was the coach. I think he was in his 70s when Alan Brown eventually let him go. This lad, and it was the one that had the relationship with Preston North End. I can remember that he was the coach and manager.
That sounds
and player.
That sounds more like Bill Scott. Arthur Wright was the one who'd played for us in the 50s, but then had a really long service at the club behind the scenes afterwards. So I might have misled you there when I'd suggested.
Yeah.
The name.
So it was Clough, you would like to think, walked away, given that he's anticipating his career's over, that he's walked away with a canny sort of testimonial fund. The tickets were 6 shillings and sixpence, which in real money's £5.73 was what it would have cost you to,
Is that cheaper
to see that game.
Cheaper than a normal league game or not?
Cheaper, 6 shillings and sixpence was par for the course, I think, at the time. The game was meant to be played on October the 6th as well. But the Football League, and this might have had something to do with some of the players that turned up. I think fairly late in the day, the Football League made Sunderland play Spurs at White Hart Lane that night in a league game. So the game got put back, and it clashed with internationals because that's where Charlie Hurley was. He was playing for Ireland against Spain that night. So. Because I think he would have turned out he had a respect for Clough as a player and goal scorer, Charlie Hurley, by all account. So a tough one for Clough, but great crowd. And I mean, the crowds turned out for him when he played, trying to make his comeback. He was a very, very popular goal scorer for us, but he only scored one goal in the top tier, Brian Clough. But what a character, what an absolute character.
That might have been something to do with the dodginess of Middlesbrough defenders and goalkeepers as well at the time, because they should have maybe got promoted but didn't somehow when he was banging the goals in for them. But the other thing I wanted to mention that I was reading, Kelvin, was that to drum up, so I mean, obviously the interest in it was huge anyway, but to drum up to make sure people would come along to his testimonial, he said beforehand, this will be the last time you will see me on a football pitch playing football. Do you think in later years he maybe regretted that, but when he thought, actually, I could have done it?
He's on record as saying that, and what the club actually did was give him a free transfer at the end of that season. So I guess in a way they're saying you can go off and play somewhere else if you want. And Clough himself, I can't remember his exact words, Chris, but I'm sure it was something like, when I look back on that in hindsight, I wish I'd tried tried a bit more to play.
I mean, just with the money involved, Kelvin, do you reckon, let's say he dropped down the leagues and kept on playing or trying to play, do you think actually he might have made more money out of having this testimonial and saying this is the last game I'm going to play? Or actually, would he have been better off playing for a few years?
What I'm not sure about, I think it's a reasonable question to ask, though, is if he'd continued playing, would have it affected could there have been some problem with the insurance money that Sunderland were going to be paid? And I think it was something like, it was substantial. It was something like £40,000. Is my memory of that that's how much we're getting. But somebody will put us right on that. But that's my memory.
I mean, this might be, I've not read too much about it. This might already be a known thing, but do you think it was a deal that made with the club where they said, look, if you make sure this is your last game, you get all the money from the testimonial, we get the insurance money, everyone's a winner?
I think, again, I think there is something that he got a little bit of the insurance money, but not a lot. And again, I'm working off unprepared memory here, but I think he might have got £1,000 or something like that. But I'm working off memory there, Chris. Defaulting memory quite a lot of the time, but there is something in the back of my head that says there was some sort of deal brokered, but he had a very fractious relationship with the board. It's hard to imagine. I think the person who seems at that time to have been able to sort of speak and work with him was George Hardwick. He seemed to have a canny relationship with him, and also clearly wanted him, could see the potential in Clough being his number two, and they would take the club forward. Clough had another ally, Len Shackleton, was a big fan, and apparently brokered the deal for him to go to Hartlepool. He spoke with the Hartlepool people and tipped Clough off about it, because I think he was actually considering going to be a youth team coach at West Bromwich Albion. I think he was looking at that, and I think Shaq's advice was go and be the head honcho at Hartlepool rather than lower down the food chain at West Brom. Yeah. Andy could stay at home. He liked living in Sunderland, and he's of course on record with that. So that. So he got to stay at home. And
he was linked. Was it West? I want to say West Brom. He was linked with a couple of other jobs, but he didn't want to move, didn't he, from the north end? I can't remember who the other one was. I'm sure was one of them.
I can't remember. The West Brom link was a youth team coach at West Brom,
and
and
it was obviously was this the Hartlepool's job? Was that Shaq?
Shaq tipped apparently spoke to him about it, and apparently had spoken to the board at Hartlepool about it as well. So.
Brilliant. Yeah. Well, there you go. The last time Brian Clough took to the pitch. So we'll move on through the 22nd of October, and we move all the way up to 1972, which was actually just 7 years after Brian Clough's testimonial. Amazingly, because Lee Clark was born. I'm not sure where. If only there was a picture that might suggest where he was born and which team he had a rivalry with, but who knows? Anyway, let's move on to 2001. Sunderland drew 1 each at home to Arsenal, thanks to a Stefan Schwarz goal scoring against his former side. We thought we'd get a dramatic injury time winner, Julio Arco header, but it was ruled out for offside. So unfortunately, it stayed 1-1, and we drew with Arsenal on the 27th of October 2001. Moving on to 2013. Fabulous day. Fabio Barini, of course, scored the winner 5 minutes from time to beat Newcastle United at the Stadium of Light, and we beat them 2-1, which we kind of always seem to do. Either 2-1 or 3-0. Those are our two favourite scorelines, aren't they, of course? And Stephen Fletcher opened the scoring after 5 minutes. We move on to October the 28th. And this one we'll cover in more detail in another day. But on 1936, Sunderland beat Arsenal 2-1 at Roker Park in our first ever Charity Shield game, courtesy of second half goals from Eddie Burbanks and Rach Carter. Interesting that there was only 11,000 there, but we'll get into more detail on that another day. Moving on to 1950, Trevor Ford made his debut as Sunderland had beaten at Stamford Bridge 3-0, which of course Andrew has touched on. 1961, Brian Clough again. He scored his third home hat-trick in a month as Plymouth Argyle had defeated 5-0. This meant he'd scored 12 goals in 5 home games, which is just incredible. And then we move on to 1987, and I'm going to touch on this a little bit. I'll try and rattle through it because I'm eager to get on to Kelvin's, to be honest, and that saga. But if anybody's like me, I don't know if you lads are like me, but I can't stand the new European competitions. I don't like the Europa League. I don't like the Conference League. I'm not a massive fan of the Champions League table thing. Bring back the days of the European Cup knockout and anyone plays anyone and all that sort of stuff. And the UEFA Cup and the Cup Winners' Cup. I'm sounding like a proper old fart now, but anyway, bring those back. Look, I talked about competitions. Andrew mentioned the Cock of the North at the beginning, and you've got competitions like the Anglo-Italian Cup, Texaco Cup, which was, of course, the old Anglo-Scottish Cup. You've then got the United Soccer Association League, which we've talked a bit about on here. We've got the Full Members Cup, the Football League Centenary Tournament, and my personal favourite, the Daily Express Five-a-side.
Get it in. That was a great one, that one.
Bring that
I
back.
love that.
I mean, Sky Sports are missing a trick on not bringing back the old, well, it would be the Sky Sports Five-a-side tournament, of course. But look, I mean, they all had their charm, and Kelvin, you had a reaction there. But to be fair, they were ultimately crap, and they just disappeared. Basically, none of them lasted very long. I mean, I mentioned the Texaco Cup, and it's kind of maybe where the story begins, really, because that ran from 70 to 75, and it was dropped by sponsors, which was it's kind of always the first nail in the coffin, isn't it, when sponsors start dropping it. So it turned into the Anglo-Scottish Cup ahead of 75, 76. It would end in 1980-81 season because Scottish clubs pulled out. They'd had enough, probably from all the travelling. But to fill the void, the FA thought, well, we need something. So they introduced what they called the Football League Group Cup, which was a really strange competition. And it was an invitational event for 32 sides across the top 4 leagues. But it ended up being way down the priority list especially for the sides in the top division, because they just didn't care about it. So it went for a rethink, and then for 83-84 season, it became the Associate Members Cup, which you've got to remember back in the day, the clubs in the top 2 divisions were considered full members of the Football League, according to the rules, the old rule book. And in the bottom 2 divisions, they were associate members, where they kind of corresponded to varying levels of voting right when it came to making decisions, which probably isn't too dissimilar now to the top of the Premier League, really, where basically whatever Manchester City says goes by the looks of it. But it was later rebranded as the Football League Trophy. But here's a question for you two, and I'm going to try and get you to go through it. Can you go through all of the Football League Trophy sponsors since it came into being?
Whoa. Yeah. Yeah. The Milk Cup.
No, that was a League Cup.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Are we including like the Sherpa van era?
Yep. So Sherpa Vans is one of them.
Zenith Data.
Yeah. Zenith Data.
In more recent times, we've had Papa John's.
Oh no, sorry, we're talking about the Football League Trophy. You're talking about the Full Members Cup there, Kelvin.
Oh.
Zenith Data.
Right.
Talking about the Football League Trophy.
Or the Football League. Oh, so that is the Milk Cup. No,
that's a League Cup. We're talking about the what are we talking about?
What are we talking about?
What is it called again? The Football League Trophy, not the League Cup.
The one we won in COVID.
Yes, the EFL Trophy.
Yeah. Sorry. So that will have been the Sherpa van, and then was it the Leyland Duff?
Leyland Duff was one of them. Yeah.
Auto windscreens.
Oh, he's good. Yeah.
Good stroke ? Sado. There's a fine line between the two.
Well, I mean, talking about Sados, people listening to 3 blokes arguing about Football League Trophy or the Foot League Cup, whatever.
We played when it was the Checker Trade.
Checker Trade, yeah.
Oh, and I now know what it is because they used to sponsor Sunderland. Is it the Virtu Motors?
Is that what it is now?
It might be that, or it might be a completely different tournament, Chris. I could be talking absolute rubbish.
Right. Well, I'll go through them anyway because you've got most of them. I think we've got Freight Rover, Sherpa Vans, Leyland DAF, Auto Glass, Auto Windscreens, the LDV Vans Trophy, Johnston's Paint. I'm not sure you got that one. Checker Trait, Leeson.com Trophy, Papa John's, of course, and then I'm sure after that I went to Bristol Street Motors.
Oh, that might be it. Yes, that might be it. Sorry.
If you won the Johnson's Paint Trophy, that would put the gloss on your season, would it not?
I just glossed my skirting boards at the weekend. It was a bloody nightmare. Anyway, but getting back to the day in question, this was the Sherpa Van Trophy era because, look, we'd never taken part in the competition, but due to Lorik Menemy doing his thing, we found ourselves, of course, relegated to Division 3. Dennis Smith came in to try and steady the ship. And we were drawn to play Scarborough in the preliminary round of the Sherpa Vans, needing to kind of progress. Scarborough at the time were on a bit of a crest of a wave, actually, in their history. An unknown fella by the name of Neil Warnock had been plucked from Burton Albion to take Scarborough to the promised land of the Football League, and he did just that. In his first season, they gained promotion to the Football League for the first time in the club's history. And it was also the first time, interestingly, that a club had been promoted into the Football League rather than being voted in. So that was the first year someone actually got promoted to the Football League.
Right.
And they were rewarded, actually, on the opening day of their season in Division 4. They were rewarded by taking on Wolverhampton Wanderers on the opening day, who would fall into the bottom division, which is pretty incredible, isn't it? But, we're talking about an era where, if you look back through the thing, Dennis Smith wasn't one for rotation. You look in the first division and you look when we played in the FA Cup, League Cup, and, priority on staying up. He didn't really rotate many players, but for this one he did. He rested Marco Gabardini and Eric Gates, and they had just dismantled York City a few days before. And he replaced them with Dale White and John Moore, which was one of the reasons I mentioned John Moore earlier on.
Yeah.
By the end of the game, we'd won 3-0, courtesy of 2 goals from Paul Lemon and 1 from John Moore. And then in the tournament itself, we went on to hammer Rotherham 7-1. We beat Crewe with the only goal of the game, and we ended up being knocked out by Hartlepool United in the quarterfinals. We got beat 1-0. Could any of you tell me who won the competition that year?
I could, because I've opened up the Wikipedia page,
right.
so I'll politely backtrack.
It's probably, well, we were probably one of the favourites to win that tournament that year, but actually it was Wolverhampton Wanderers who were in the bottom 2 divisions. They ended up they beat Burnley 2-0. And of course, you could argue, I'm not saying it is, but you could argue maybe some of the success we're having now stemmed from us winning the tournament just by getting used to winning things. I'm not saying it is. I'm not saying it's all down to that, but it's a part of that journey, isn't it?
Well, it put to bed the idea that we're in modern times we couldn't win at Wembley. It definitely put that to bed, didn't it? And you felt when we hit that the next playoff final, my head wasn't playing with how many times have I been to Wembley and seen us beat. My head was playing with, we've been here, we've won that, we're over it, we're going to win this one as well. So it definitely put that to bed. It was just a shame that nobody was there for that game, wasn't it? You often feel I was watching Lyndon Good the other week on the telly and thinking, God, I wish that lad had Wembley had been full for his, because undoubtedly we would have just gone and at least packed our side of the stadium out for that. We were that desperate for a Wembley win, weren't we?
Well, it was comforting listening to Carl Winchester the other week, because he said it was strange Wembley being like that, but he said they didn't half celebrate after. So he said that they still enjoyed it, which was good.
Clough, on that earlier point, by the way, that Carl Winchester pod was really good. He came across really nice lad. Really nice that one.
Really nice fellow.
Aye. So if people haven't heard that, I would recommend digging that one out. Yeah, Clough, who we've mentioned already in this episode, I think with Forest, I think he won a similar trophy called the Watney Cup. It was it was a minor competition, and he definitely said that winning that trophy was a key part to the club then going on to bigger and better things. I think Jose Mourinho, quite similar. He saw any trophy when he took charge of a club as a brilliant start. Didn't matter what the status of it was. So yeah, us winning at Wembley, I do think had an impact.
I'm sure it wasn't Mourinho's first trophy. Didn't he win the League Cup?
I think so, yeah.
And he said if they hadn't won that and getting over the line there, that other things wouldn't have happened. But yeah, I always think that no, it's not down to that. But I always think that the winning that trophy is a small part in us changing our mentality.
Exactly. And then just very briefly, you mentioned Paul Lemon scored a couple of goals in the game, Chris. Somewhere on YouTube is footage of one of those goals, and it is brilliant. Yeah. It's a fantastic chip. So if anybody has the time to dig that out, it's a good one.
Well, he was kind of on the periphery, and I never really saw Paul Lemon play. I mean, was he kind of unfortunate not to have a better career at Sunderland, or?
From what I gather, he was a really good player, but when he got into the first team, he was kind of shunted out of position. So maybe felt as if he didn't get to show his best skills.
Yeah. He definitely had some potential, Paul Lemon. Yeah, he was I quite liked him when he first came into the squad, and I think Andrew's right. He was, it's a bit like when you think back to Jordan Henderson when he first comes in. I'm not suggesting he's at the level of Jordan Henderson, but young players come in, they're fit, they've got a bit more pace about them, so they get shunted all over the park with the old adage that it'll be good for your career, son, to play a few different positions. And I think that definitely happened to him. Yeah, he was great at squeezing the defence, though, Paul Lemon.
I just hope he wasn't bitter about getting shunted about.
Well, hey.
But anyway, moving on. Going into 2000 on October the 28th, we beat Coventry City through an Emerson Thome goal. And I mention this because any win over Coventry should be mentioned, I reckon. 2002, Claudio Reyna, he ruptured a knee ligament in a 1-1 draw at Bolton Wanderers, which kept him out for the rest of the season. And this was his last game for Sunderland. 2006, a last-minute goal by Ross Wallace gave us a 1-0 win at Hull City. But then he received a second yellow card for his goal celebrations and was sent off. Can you remember him when he took his top off and Roy Keane was asked about it? And he said, if I had his physique, I wouldn't be taking my top off.
He's a bugger. Keane, yeah.
Brilliant. Absolutely. Loved it. Moving on to October the 29th, and we start with 1866. It was the birth of a certain goalkeeper by the name of John Edward Doig.
Get in
Letham in Forfarshire. Did I get that right, Kelvin?
Well, you're saying it quite poshly there, Chris.
Yeah, well, that's why I did it.
You'll be back talking about Swedes in a minute.
Well, the thing is, it just makes me want to say 454 East 55.
Right.
That's just you say 44, and that's all you want to say. But yeah, so he was, of course, record 4 top flight championship medals, along with Jimmy Miller, whilst at Sunderland. 1898. Hugh Wilson scored the first hat-trick by a Sunderland player at Roker Park in a 3-0 victory over Bury. 1932, Sunderland beat Bolton Wanderers 7-4 at Roker Park, having been 6-2 up at half-time. Sounds like an absolute belter. Bobby Gurney scored 4, Connor Carter and Temple getting the rest. 1966 is a good one, Kelvin, isn't it? Went to St James's Park and hammered them 3-0, and I'll let you tell us a bit about it.
Yeah. Jump in on this one. What an excited little boy. I wasn't a little boy. I'd be about, what was it, 66. I'd be about 9, 10 years old, and got the chance to go to Newcastle to my first away game.
Wow.
Bearing in mind that I could get Newcastle 25 minutes quicker than what I could get to Roker Park, so from Morpeth. So it was my first away game, and massive crowd. I spent a week, well, because I knew I was going. I was a very excited lad. I spent the week being Jimmy Baxter on the Clarty field outside our house. I was telling anybody that would listen to us we were going to win 3-0. And I swear to God, I spent the week telling people that. And was absolutely convinced that's what was going to happen. We got the game. It was the local curate at the church that took us to the game. I went with 2 other lads, and 2 of us were Sunderland fans, and we were perched on the fence at the Leazes end, and watched that game on the fence. And I always remember this. I tell everybody this. 1966. I'm turning round when we scored, and there were scarves and everything getting waved all over the place. So segregation, although there were some issues, segregation hadn't quite found its way in then, and there was Sunderland fans all over the place. There was a lot in the Gallagher, but there were a lot of fans on the fence and what have you.
Sorry, Kelvin, just while you're on the topic, was this an era, so 1966, was this an era where, fans used to go and watch both clubs? Was this a friendly kind of era then?
There were people that did that, and in fact, the lad that the curate that used to take us, he would go to Newcastle if he had the afternoon off, he'd go and watch some football, and so you had this floating group of football fans, adults I'm talking about here, that had the capacity and the finance to go and watch one or the other. Both play week in, week out. There were a number of people that would go to Sunderland one week and Newcastle the next. But most of those people, when I speak to them, they had their team. They were either Newcastle or Sunderland fans, but they hadn't a problem going in and watching Sunderland play if you were a Newcastle fan. And I mean, the first games I ever went to were at Newcastle. I had an uncle that was a really big fan, and I'd been there about 4 or 5 times before I ever went to Roker Park. My uncle was determined that I was going to be a Newcastle fan, and just kept taking me. And I went to Roker Park once, and I knew the first time I went, the game wasn't finished, and I knew I'm coming back here. This is going to be my team, and so that game, it was brilliant, massive crowd, and Newcastle had just signed Wyn Davies, which was like Trevor Ford. Wyn was a Welsh international and had a similar kind of reputation as Ford had. He was a big, hard, ginger-haired bruiser who could play a bit. Wyn Davies, he had a fearsome reputation. And in the papers before that game, what Davies was going to do to Sunderland, and in particularly to our new centre-half that would sign George Kinnell, was nobody's business. Kinnell was just playing his second game for that day. And as I've said, I've written about this game before, and I've said when they're lined up in the tunnel to come out, Kinnell put Wyn Davies in his pocket, and he let him out again after the game had finished. That's what Kinnell did that day. He absolutely bossed him. Newcastle were struggling a bit themselves in the league, and hence the need to get Davies in. And we probably played them at a good time, but my goodness, it was a for a young lad. I mean, I spent the earliest years of my Sunderland supporting career thinking we'll always beat Newcastle 3-0 because later in the year we beat them at our place 3-0, and then which I know it did make me sound like a dinosaur when we racked up them 3-0 victories against them later on, and I'm thinking, nah, that's not new. We've always done this. We've always beat them 3-0, you know. But couple of things I particularly remember about this game. One of them more a personal one was getting on the fence, and there were two brothers next to us, Newcastle fans, and my opening gambit to them was, "We're going to hammer you 3-0." It wasn't hello. Are you looking forward to the game? You know, we're going to beat you 3-0, says I, you know, and I just kept, honestly, I just kept telling people that. And we come out, the game gets going. I think Geordie Mullow, Ben's one past for the first goal. Baxter had a good game this day. He bends one past Mulhall. Geordie Mulhall bends a wicked shot in early in the game. And I can always remember Jim Baxter. Newcastle had a young lad, a local lad, I think he was from Burnopfield, called John Craggs, and he was a good club servant, John Craggs, to Newcastle. And he was a good player, but he was just a young lad when he was playing in that game. And he had Geordie Mulhall flying down his wing, playing out of his skin. And he had Baxter, who, you know, was dandering along and ghosting past everybody down. That's a Halloween reference there, Andrew, ghosting past. And working his ticket. He was a right shithouser, Baxter. And Craggs tried to take him at the kneecaps. And Baxter sort of swerved round him. And instead of getting on with the game, sort of leant back and patted him on the head, and does a win. You could see the Newcastle crowd, you know, were all like, reeling their arms at him and cussing and swearing at him, and he's just like, yeah, you know, I love a bit of that, man, you know. But John Craggs and I think Newcastle actually, I think Frank Clark came and played on that side because they were murdering Craggs, you know. But I mean, they did the same to Frank Clark that day. Mulhall and Baxter could work together a bit, you know, when they were playing. So Geordie Mulhall, he scored a good goal. He bent the ball in, and then Neil Martin scores what he considers to be the best goal of his Sunderland career. And it's Lenny Ashurst of all people that creates that. He goes flying down the wing, which wasn't something he did a lot, but he goes down the wing and he just hammers this cross. And Neil Martin, who'd he'd tortured the Newcastle defence, but Bobby Moncur couldn't get a handle on him. He was all over him, Martin. He was a very, very good centre forward, Neil Martin. And he sees this cross, and it's like he runs at it into the space, jumps, and I can see him heading this this cross, you know, and it never moves up nor down. It just goes straight in the back of the net from about 15 yards out. Yeah, bugger. What a goal, man. And where I'm going nuts on the fence. I wasn't the only one, but I cheered that goal like there was need tomorrow. And what a blooming goal it was, you know. And then in the second half, I think it was John O'Hare scores in the second half. And again, Baxter's got a hand in that. I think Baxter finds him in the box. Mulhall, Baxter involved in that. And Baxter and O'Hare plays the ball in from about 10 yards out. That was a bit closer. That was at the other end of the ground from me. I think I didn't have a great view of that. But again, 3-0, brilliant. And, you know, as I say, Wyn Davis, where's your famous Wyn Davis? You know, he's still in George Cannell's pocket. That's where Wyn Davis was, you know. So It was Cannell played really well that day. I was never his biggest fan. I've said that before, but he played for his second game. He played a really good game against a very, very good player. And you would think that was us, our season was going to kick on. It didn't. But it was a cracking result, and a very, very good memory of my first derby game. That one, loved it. 58,740 at the game.
Yeah.
Raucous.
Well, yeah, as you mentioned that, 58,000. Our home game, which was 4 days before against Stoke, 23,000. I mean, we were struggling that year, and we'd struggled the season before, hadn't we?
Mm-hmm. It was very. If you look at the attendances, though, for both teams, Newcastle as well, the derby game would pull a crowd in. There were teams that could pull a crowd. You'd get 25,000 one week, and then 50 odd for the Man United game. Man U at that time. And it wasn't their fans; it was people in the area happy to come out and see Man United play, see Jody Best and Crerand and Bobby Charlton and all them boys play. So that the derby game would always pull a crowd in, great occasion, and very, very vivid memories. And them two brothers, I've often wished that I could meet them two brothers and apologize for being such a bloody pain in the butt I must have been to them, because I always say that my father taught us how to be magnanimous in victory, because he was a Newcastle fan, and I went home from that game and I was like 3-0 in it, all over the house, and telling them what a great player Jimmy Baxter was and Neil Martin and, your boys, where were they? And he just quietly got on with it. But I learned, obviously, I had plenty of opportunity to learn what it feels like to be on the other side of that as well. And them two brothers, canny lads, they were very nice boys. And I'm like, 3-0, I told you. Dreadful. I'm embarrassed by that behaviour now when I think about it. But I was only 9 years old. Yeah, come on,
exactly, absolutely. And you've always been the same since. So don't But just quickly looking at that, the attendance, like I said, the game before that against Stoke, 23,000. You mentioned the derby when we beat them 3-0 later in March at Roker Park. That drew in 50,000, but that was beaten about a week later by playing Leeds United in the fifth round of the FA Cup, where there was 55,000 at Roker Park, but almost double the amount of that Stoke game.
Yeah, and we were starting to get on there was a little bit of momentum starting to build towards the end of that season. A little bit of momentum starting to build with probably, I would say, around Bobby Kerr's introduction. The team, I would say. So, happy days. Great stuff.
You say momentum. I'm just looking. I think we lost 9 of the last 12 league.
We did.
But anyway, moving swiftly on.
This episode is brought to you by Casamigos Tequila. What do you bring to a holiday party? Simple. A bottle of Casamigos. Because nothing gets the party started like a Casamigos margarita, which isn't just for summer. In fact, it's the perfect pour all year round. Casamigos is the gift that always feels right, because anything goes with my Casamigos. Please drink responsibly. Imported by Casamigos Spirits Company, White Plains, New York. Casamigos Tequila, 40% alcohol by volume.
Every who down in Who Newville liked the holidays a ton, but where to get great prices on gifts, they had no idea. None. They searched and they searched for great gifts under $25. Gifts for spouses and friends and even their toddlers. When suddenly one who shouted, Walmart has what you want, knowing they have Lego, Tree Hut, and low prices to flaunt. So they enjoy the holiday season as Who's often do. Cheering and shouting, Walmart has incredible gifts. Who knew? Find gifts they'll love under $25 at Walmart.
With new, gentler scented Clorox disinfecting wipes, clean finally smells as good as it feels. On everything from lamps to ceiling fans. Even on your kid's toy shark. Oh, ouch. Clorox disinfecting wipes. Now available in... Ooh, crisp lemon. Find it on Amazon. Clorox. Clean feels good.
Let's go to 1973, Kelvin, because talking about epic games and things. 1973. So Sunderland take on Dave Mackay's Derby County at Roker Park in a League Cup second round replay. This was after drawing 2s each at the baseball ground against Brian Clough's Derby County side.
Yeah. And what even just those 3 games, but when you put it into the context of what else was happening for Sunderland at the time, you've got the Cup Winners' Cup games going on. You've got a league program where there's, the team's under a lot of pressure to get out of that division, and it hasn't. The league we're not firing off every cylinder in the league, but in the cup, we were a great cup team, and I think coming into this game, it was Bob Stoker's 15th cup tie, undefeated, in his tenure. It had been a good game. This had started on October the 8th at Derby. Derby had gone 2-0 up. Each game had been fantastic, fantastic entertainment. It had been Brian Clough's team. And they'd gone 2-0 up, and then John Lathan scored 2 goals in the last 10 minutes at the baseball ground to pull it back and to bring them back to Roker. There's nigh on 40,000 people come in for the first replay, and that was, very, very vivid memories of that. Dennis Stewart missed a penalty on 20 minutes to send with 1-0 up. It was a cracking game. To and fro, and Derby they had some cracking players playing for them, household names playing for them. And Dave Mackay, though, was a larger than life kind of character. So was Clough, but Dave Mackay in the game, he was a household name, and he was probably if you were going to have somebody that was going to take over from Clough, you would need somebody like him. He was a larger than life kind of character. He was a great player when he played, and a lad that did well, following Clough up when he went into Derby. He also wasn't a bad judge of the player, because that next season, I'm digressing a little bit, but they won the league the following season, and all he did was added a couple of players, but it was the players he added that I thought made the difference there. Bruce Rioch, he bought in the January, and then Franny Lee, he got from Man City coming towards the end of his career. Yeah. Anyway, so we play them on the. I'm just looking at the date of that. The replay is on the 29th. It goes into extra time. It's 1s each. It can't be decided. The toss a coin. We're coming back. Can you imagine it on the 31st? 2 nights later to play again, and there's another nigh on 40,000 crowd comes back again for that game 2 nights later. What a game this was! What a fantastic game of football it was.
And as Kelvin says, we knew we were going to take on Liverpool, and I'm going to leave everyone on the edge of their seats to wait until Halloween to find out what happened in that second replay. Everyone probably already knows. We might have already mentioned it, but I'm going to have everyone waiting until Halloween. And we've got gremlins in the system on Kelvin's side, because he lives right out in the sticks, and he's forgot to put 50 pence in the meter. So he's going to have to rummage around and see if he can get back on. But anyway, let's go into the 30th of October, because we want to start in 1886. Now, this might have been mentioned on last week's pod. Andrew can tell me after I go through it how much was talked about it. But this was 30th of October, 1886, which was a time that Sunderland had built up a solid reputation by playing in the games that were, of course, deemed as friendlies. But before the creation of Football League, of course, that was the only form of competition. So those were kind of keenly contested games back in the day. Of course, the introduction of the FA Cup in the early 1870s, that presented a good opportunity to make things even more competitive. I think I talked when Sunderland were about to join the Football League, how competitive those were, and that the formation of the Football League, that this was the only competition that people could kind of take part in. November 1884 was when Sunderland first took part. We were beaten by Redcar 3-1 in the first round. The following year saw Redcar win 3-0 in the first round, again against Sunderland. But the following year, 1886-87, Sunderland had become the dominant side in the town, good reputation, steadily growing. And the first round draw really drew interest at this point. A preview of the game in the Sunderland Daily Echo and Shipping Gazette suggested that although West End, who we were going to play, Newcastle West End, were confident, the tie could be a close run thing. It said, I believe that the game will be stoutly contested from first to last, and whichever team wins will only do so by the skin of their teeth. If Sunderland should be victorious, they certainly deserve great credit, seeing that the team is entirely composed of Sunderland youths, no outside aid whatever having been called. Also in the preview was advice to fans wishing to attend due to the high interest in the tie. It said, before leaving the subject, I advise all those who wish to have a place against the ropes to be early at the scene of action. For granted anything like favourable weather, there will be one of the largest musters ever seen at a football game in Sunderland. And the game was scheduled to kick off at 3 o'clock, but as the Morpeth Herald described, there was a delay to proceedings. It said the advertised time for the game was 3 o'clock, but it was not until 3:40 that the Sunderland men arrived. They're having to engage a break to bring them from Sunderland to Newcastle, or from Newcastle to the field of play. I'm not sure what a break was. I'm not sure if you know what that was, Andrew. I forgot to look this up.
It might. Is it like a kind of fancy horse-drawn carriage, maybe?
If I had to guess, that's what I would have guessed.
Yeah. But so was that the Sunderland players were somehow in Newcastle?
Yeah, it said that the Sunderland men arrived. They're having to engage a break to bring them from Newcastle to the field of play. But it would prove significant as we go on, because the away side won the toss and elected to kick uphill in the opening period, which was decided that they would play half an hour rather than the full 45 minutes because of the late start. And recent rain had created a slippery surface, and the game began. John Oliver, in particular, impressed for Sunderland, creating early chances, and we were unfortunate not to break the deadlock until Oliver was the provider for Jack Lord to score with a low shot. It went into half-time. Sunderland were leading, despite kicking up the hill. In the second half, we started as the better side, but against the run of play, West End forced a series of corners, where the third of which was met by E. Hendy, who levelled the game at 1-1. But soon after, there was a corner forced at the other end, and after the initial clearance fell to Lord, he bagged his second of the game to put Sunderland back into the lead. And yeah, I'll just read the kind of quick match report, because it said, at Sunderland, before 5,000 spectators and in fine weather, but the ground was slippery on account of the recent rains, each side scored a goal, the play being fast and exciting, particularly towards the end. It was decided to play another half hour, a quarter each way, and almost in darkness, and a few more minutes before the termination of the last quarter of an hour, Sunderland scored another goal. Because, as we said, without floodlights, of course, the end of the game was completed in almost complete darkness. And there was scenes of celebrations amongst the bumper crowd at Newcastle Road. But in the aftermath, an objection to the completion of the tie was received by the Football Association by the losing side. Not bitter or anything. After deliberation, it was not only decided that the game should be replayed, but for some bizarre reason, they decided that the fixture should take place at Newcastle 2 weeks later, and the replay ended in a 1-0 victory for West End, and Sunderland again bowed out of the FA Cup in the first round. So we were still looking for our first victory in the competition, even though we won this game. But as we might come round to it, we got our chance to get our own back the following year, but we might come on to that another time. But anyway, let's move on, because so that should have been, Andrew, to be fair, that should have been in the record books as our first ever FA Cup victory.
It should have been, and Kelvin was talking earlier about how the atmosphere at Sunderland Newcastle games in the 60s was a little bit more cordial. It just goes to show that even back in the day, long before that, it wasn't Newcastle United, it was one of their predecessors. There was obviously still a bit of tension between the two, but quite apt that, seeing as we're doing a Halloween episode, we've already had Kelvin start buffering on us and look a bit scary when his line went down. Quite apt that the game around Halloween time was played in pitch black. That must have been quite an eerie atmosphere, that one. I'm not sure how I would have felt trying to watch a match in pitch black.
Well, the closest I think I've come to that was probably Southend away. Michael Bridges' first ever goal for Sunderland, that nobody knew had actually happened until all the Sunderland players ran out of the fog back to the Sunderland fans saying, we've scored.
Bless him. Imagine making your way in the game. You've tried for years to have your breakthrough. You finally score your first goal. I want to watch the footage of that memorable day in my career. Oh, you can't, because it's too foggy.
Yeah, I haven't looked for that footage of that goal, actually. I wonder if the cameras actually caught it. I'm not sure I've ever seen it. I'll have to... There's a review kind of the thing of the whole season on YouTube somewhere, so I might have to...
I think, Chris, you can see some like blurs some like blurs flashing around in amongst the fog. But bit of a shame, and yeah, no surprise that a Sunderland versus Newcastle game ends in a bit of controversy.
Yeah. I'm not surprised. Well, we was talking before we recorded, and not surprised they took it to Parliament with their MP and all that sort of stuff like that. They sometimes do. But anyway, let's move on, because October the 30th, 1909, George Holley scored his second successive home hat-trick as Sunderland beat Chelsea 4-0. 1954, Ken Chisholm, Billy Bingham and Stan Anderson. Anderson's was a penalty. This gave Sunderland a 3-1 victory at Arsenal in front of 65,000 people. It was their third match in front of a crowd in excess of 60,000 that month. We move on to 1972, a great day in the history of Sunderland Football Club. Milton Nunes was born, which is exactly the type of information our listeners expect from us. 1976, Sunderland ended a period of 6 years and 209 days without a top-flight victory. Beat Coventry 2-1, so this is the second victory over Coventry we mentioned today, which is a good thing. Bob Lee got his first for the club, and Billy Hughes got the goals. 2004, we go on to beating Brighton at the Stadium of Light 2-0 with second-half goals from Julio Arco, which again was a penalty, and Liam Lawrence scored the second. We're not even on to Halloween, but in 2021, Sunderland were beaten 5-1 at Rotherham United. And speak of the devil, let's get on to Halloween. 1908, England internationals even. Arthur Brown, George Holley and Arthur Bridget scored 2 goals each as Sunderland beat Manchester United 6-1 at Roker Park. 1973, and here we are. If we didn't mention it earlier on, and if everyone's waiting on the edge of their seat anticipating what happened in that second replay, Vic Hallam scored his only hat-trick for Sunderland as we finally overcame Derby County 3-0 in that League Cup second round. And this was obviously the second replay of that game. But yeah, that was at Roker Park, of course. we skip forward to 1999. And I don't know if you remember about this one, Andrew, but in 1999, October the 31st, it was definitely a scary Halloween for Sol Campbell on this day, because Sunderland beat Tottenham Hotspur 2-1 at the Stadium of Light, which kept us in third place. Niall Quinn scored both goals. Now, I don't know, I can remember this quite vividly, how much of a hard time Niall Quinn gave Sol Campbell on that day. I mean, he absolutely tore him apart.
He did. He tortured him. Niall Quinn, what a guy. We always talk about the amazing things he did for the club once he retired playing, but as an actual footballer, he was absolutely amazing. His control, or when he chested the ball down, just phenomenal. And Sol Campbell was probably the best English defender in the game at that point. You know, Sol Campbell was right amongst the best of the best. And Niall Quinn just made him look like a part-timer. Just amazing. And then it was an amazing time in general to be watching the team, because Quinn could do that to anybody. He just you couldn't handle him.
Yeah, absolutely. And but it is a funny thing about Niall Quinn, isn't it? Because a lot of younger people, you know, because it's easy to forget, it's like 20 years since he came in as chairman, pretty much. Which I'm just looking at your face, Andrew. It's ridiculous, isn't it? So you're talking about teenagers, 16, 17, 18-year-olds, you know, they just think Niall Quinn took over as chairman and, you know, magic carpet ride and all this sort of stuff. But it's so easy to forget how good a player he was. And people talk about the partnership he had with Phillips and stick a big diag on his head and all this sort of stuff. But you look at the way, and this game's a perfect example, the way he used to get half a yard on defenders by giving them a little shove. And every time it would land on his chest or he trapped the ball, the amount of times he took the ball down and volleyed it first. Look at the goal in the playoff final against Charlton. Unbelievable. His control from a long ball was just incredible. And it's easy to forget in everything else he did just how skillful a player he actually was.
Yeah, skillful, so clever with it. It's that cliche, isn't it? You know, good skills for a big man, but he wasn't the type of bustling striker who would, ram into people and shove them to the deck. He was canny with what he did. He would just get half a yard off them by a little nudge or just a little flick to get himself the room. It was brilliant to watch. I loved watching Quinn. It's funny because, bless him, he didn't look like a footballer. I mean, do you remember around about that time he would always wear this scabby T-shirt underneath his kit that was like poking out through the sleeves, and he just looked like he'd, rocked up 20 minutes before, thrown the kit on, and then just magic. Some of the stuff he did was magic, and maybe Phillips got more of the attention because it was Phillips benefiting from Quinn's work to get the actual ball in the net. But I think any type of striker could have played alongside Quinn and enjoyed it, because he just a real special player. Yeah. Lovely guy. We love him as a person, but yeah, we cannot forget what he did as a player.
Yeah, there was a recent podcast with Marcel Desailly when he said he came across from Serie A and came into the Premier League, and he was like playing up against it. And then he actually mentioned Niall Quinn and the likes of Duncan Ferguson. He went, "What is this?" He went, "How are you supposed to defend against people like this?" But yeah, absolutely brilliant. And we move on to Halloween on the year 2000. Don Hutchison scored twice in Sunderland's 2-1 League Cup third round win at Bristol Rovers. This was actually Paul Butler's and Michael Reddy's final game for Sunderland. In true Halloween tradition, we go to 2010. Sunderland are beaten 5-1 at St James's Park.
Well, anyway, Chris, I found something interesting to talk about here.
Well, because I'm moving on to 2017 now, because I don't know if it gets worse or not, but a 3-3 draw at the Stadium of Light in front of just under 27,000 saw Simon Grayson sacked as Sunderland manager. And it's funny, this one, Andrew, because, I was hoping he would be the kind of specialist we needed but I was never sold on him. But you could see the reasons why, because he'd getting sides promoted and before from the third tier to the second, and he had that kind of pedigree about him. But it kind of limped on a little bit, and it's bizarre because you always wonder how these things happen, how things play out. And then, of course, we saw the whole thing play out on Netflix, didn't we? When you saw Martin Bain go to the lift, and that's the last you see of him, and then the announcement in the press conference, which wasn't a press conference, but it was immediately after the game. But it's one of these things that I never quite understand this, that if you think someone's a good coach, right? If you appoint someone and you go, he's talented, he knows what he's doing, and you're basing it off one game, off one result. Like, if you thought before the game, and this happens in football all the time, if you think before the game he's not your man, and if this result doesn't go right, you're going to sack him, then do it before the game.
Yeah.
Why wait till after a game?
Yeah, if Sunderland had scored a fluky winner in the last minute where the defenders lobbed his own keeper from the halfway line, does that then make Grayson the right choice? It often confuses me, but that's what goes wrong in football. The people making the decisions often do so without thinking it through. I mean, I had to laugh at the weekend when Postecoglou went, and they were all making such a big song and dance about, it was only 20 minutes after full time. I'm thinking, hey, Sunderland have been there and done that long before. There's nothing new about getting shot of your manager in the moments after a match. But to be fair to Grayson, he wasn't great, but he was nowhere near the top of the list of issues with the club at that point, and changing the manager at that stage was not going to correct all the other issues with that club. And that game against Bolton was just, were they bottom at the start of the game?
Yeah,
I don't think would not won at home in coming up to a year. It was it was dreadful. I seem to think we scored and we went ahead for the first time at home in a long time. And then within seconds, we'd gone and conceded an absolute shocker at the other end. It was just grim times. And you couldn't sum it up any better than saying that was Halloween, because it was scary how bad that club was at the time.
And the manager of Bolton Wanderers that night, Andrew?
It wasn't was it Parkinson?
Just to tip off the cherry on the top for Halloween.
Yeah.
It was Phil Parkinson.
So when people say things can't get any worse, they can. So there you go.
Yeah. There was two players in the Bolton side, ex-Sunderland players in the Bolton side that night. It was Ben Anick in goal for Bolton, conceding 3 goals and conceding that equaliser to Paddy McNair, which ultimately didn't save Simon Grayson's job. And on the bench, an unused substitute for Bolton Wanderers was Will Buckley.
Never.
But also a couple of players, a few notable players in that Bolton side. David Wheater, of course, ex-Borough. Sammy Amiobi, who was playing in that Bolton side and scored. And the other the other 2 goal scorers, actually, Carl Henry, who had a few run-ins with Sunderland over the years. And Gary Medine was the other goal scorer.
This is painful.
Well, I told you we were going to go for a scary Halloween special today, but yeah, let's move on. Let's move on to get off Halloween, and let's move on to November the 1st. We start with 1890, Sunderland's first ever home victory in the Football League, when we beat Blackburn Rovers in front of around 14,000 at Newcastle Road. 1952, we've talked about him a lot today. Welsh centre forward Trevor Ford scored 4 goals, including a penalty in Sunderland's 5-2 victory at Manchester City. 1972, now I wanted to stop just a little bit on this one, Andrew, because 1972, Alan Brown was sacked, ending his second spell in charge of Sunderland. Former player Billy Wright stepped up as caretaker manager until Bob Stoker was appointed later that season. We're talking about him a bit on previous episodes, but Alan Brown, he confuses me completely, because on paper you say, well, he was in charge for our first 2 relegations from the top flight. But Brian Clough thought he was brilliant. He turned the club round after the financial, shenanigans that went on. He started to build that young side that Stoker then took on. I don't know where he sits. I don't know if because you talk to some people, you go Alan Brown, legend of the club, but then he was the one who had the first 2 relegations. I don't know where he sits in Sunderland's history.
Chris, you and me both. I mean, you're looking to me for some sort of help on this, and I'm exactly the same as you. He had such an impact on the club and on so many individuals, like you say, Clough, who went on to achieve the highest heights in football, and yet there's those 2 relegations against his name. I think in both instances, he was perhaps working with one hand tied behind his back. Like you say, there was money issues. And the second time around, I think he'd been forced to get rid of all the high earners and bring through the kids. But yeah, it doesn't look good on a CV, does it? In charge for both of Sunderland's first 2 relegations, bless him. But, at least when we talk about him, there were upsides. There's plenty of other managers who had the relegations on the CV and and nothing else.
Yeah, we need Kelvin here to put us right and tell us we're talking absolute rubbish, and he was brilliant. But yeah, moving on, November the 1st, 1997, Nordy Makele was born. I've been absolute, and I'd love to. We'll have to ask Kelvin at some point. How does he, after only 8 or so games, whatever, how he ranks with up there with the likes of Colin Todd and all them? But you might need a year or 2 to get up to in there with Kelvin's thoughts.
Colin Todd, can I just pull us back to that 1973 game, the Derby game? Apparently, Colin Todd made a mistake for one of Sunderland's goals. Now, I know in future we'll talk about that game in more depth. Maybe if Kelvin comes back on the pod this time next year when we round that up. But I was amazed to see that Todd had made a mistake, because we're led to believe he was just flawless, wasn't he, Chris? He was such a good player, and whenever Kelvin talks about him, his face lights up. So yeah, maybe you and me in years to come are talking about Makele in the same way, and that'll be another pod for another day, I think.
Yeah, I'm sure Kelvin wouldn't have told us about Colin Todd's mistake, actually. I don't think he would have mentioned it. But actually, speaking of Colin Todd, because we move on to 1998, and Alan Johnson, Al Quinn and Michael Bridges scored as Sunderland comfortably beat Colin Todd's Bolton Wanderers at the Reebok Stadium in a Sunday afternoon televised game. 2003, it's the debut of Stuart Downing for Sunderland in a goalless draw at the Hawthorns. This was the start of a 7-game loan spell from Middlesbrough, which he scored 3 times. Back in the day when you had proper loan spells, we were talking about Ian Snowden on a previous episode. Come for a month and then go back. Peter Bakery as well. Throw him in there as well. Move on to 2008 on November the 3rd. Jordan Henderson made his Sunderland debut in a 5-0 defeat at Chelsea. November the 2nd, our last day. 1928 was the birth of 1950s Welsh international centre-half Ray Daniel in Swansea. 1935, the debut of outside right Len Duns, who we've mentioned quite a lot on previous episodes. It was a 2-2 draw at Portsmouth, proved to be the start of a 16-year career with his only league club, in which he won a league championship and FA Cup winners medal before he turned 21. 1963, 2 goals from Johnny Crossan and 1 from George Hurd gave Sunderland a 3-0 home win over Grimsby Town, moving them up to 2nd in Division 2. 1972, Paul Butler was born, cracking centre-half for Sunderland. And our last one for the day, November the 2nd, 1991, it was Jarrow-born Craig Russell's debut, coming on as a substitute for David Rush in a 3-1 home victory over Watford. Just sticking on that one for a second, because we did talk to Craig Russell in the past about this game, and I don't know if you listened to that one, but it was quite a strange one, because he said it was one of them where, and if you look at the time, actually, the start of that season, it was when Dennis Smith was kind of struggling and looking for formulas, and Marco Gabardini leaving, and John Byrne coming in, waiting for Don Goodman to come in. And he said it was one of these things. He was banging goals in for the youth side and hadn't really played for the reserves. And it was one of them, Dennis Smith. He was ready to kind of, because he had to sort all the gear out for the first team squad. And he went, "What you doing?" Yeah, "Well, I'm doing my jobs." He went, "You're playing. You're in the team for tomorrow." And he said the bizarre thing is, because again, I don't know if you remember, but this game was changed because I think it was the Rugby World Cup final on the same day. But he said in the morning, on his way to Roker Park, he basically got on the bus from Jarrow with his with his gear and everything, took the bus to Roker Park, 17-year-old lad. Nobody, everyone else going to the match and stuff like that. Nobody recognised him going to Roker Park, and then just wandering in off the bus, ready to play that afternoon against Watford. Unbelievable, isn't it?
It's amazing, and you hear stories about players getting the bus to games, and you think, "Oh, we must be talking about the 50s or 60s." But this is in our lifetime, Chris. It just
oh, don't.
It's not, no, I wasn't meaning to bring you down. It's crazy to think. I loved Craig Russell, and I loved the fact that he was a Sunderland fan. I mean, he must have been so excited on that bus journey to go, thinking, "I'm going to make my debut." There must have been somebody about to do the shopping, looking at some daft lad at the back of the bus, thinking, "What's up with this kid? He can't sit still." Just again, it's a cliche, but it is proper like Roy of the Rovers stuff to be playing for the team you supported. And at 17, Chris, I don't know about you, but I was not in any sort of mental state to be playing competitive first team football at 17. It's mad. I tell you what, as well, is quite interesting. I think these pods around this time of year are going to be full of stories like that, like managers getting booted out, like players who were suddenly given a debut from nowhere, because it's that time of the season, isn't it, when you've got over that initial excitement of the first few games, and then you start to think, "Oh, mind, where's this season going?" Either you're doing well and you're bringing in a few prospects here and there, or you're struggling, and if you know you're about to be given the chop, you're going to be desperate on you, and you're just going to start handing out debuts to anyone, hoping that they come good. Yeah. So it doesn't surprise me that there's a lot of debuts and a lot of managers changing around here. And Craig Russell, loved him to bits. And he worked for the club a long time afterwards as well, didn't he? Yeah. He's been on the backroom staff.
Yeah. And unfortunately, I think he left the club during lockdown, didn't he? When we had to make some cutbacks. But just on that, on his debut, he came on for the last 15 minutes, as I said, replacing David Rush. I think we were 3-0 at the time, or Gary Porter might have just pulled one back when we made a change. I'm not quite sure. But in goal that day for Watford,
was that David? I've not got it, but was that David James?
It was. David James was in goal for Watford that day. John Byrne scored 2, Gordon Armstrong got the other. And up front, Luther Blissett, of course, for Watford played that day with David. And David Holdsworth was in that side as well, brother of Dean, of course. Yeah. The other one, I wanted to double check with you. Gary Porter, wasn't he Sunderland born?
I think he was a local lad who he might have been a Monk Wearmouth lad,
I think he was. I was going to ask you whether he was. Yeah,
I was worried there that we might have gone a pod without mentioning Monk Wearmouth, but we've saved it at the death.
Last minute winner. There you go. We've not had it on, but yeah, Gary Porter was Sunderland born, because it was I always thought when I was young he might sign for Sunderland, and the other one was you know what? And his name completely has left me. The Tottenham midfielder,
Mickey Hazard.
Yeah. I always thought he might play for Sunderland someday, and it never quite happened. But there you go. So that covers our 7 days. So that's all that leaves. That now is our quiz question for next week, Andrew.
Yes, we will be covering the 3rd to the 9th of November, I believe. The quiz question is based on a game that took place on the 3rd, 1987, when we played Southend United at home. And I am wondering who can tell us which 2 Sunderland players made their debuts that evening.
There you go. Interesting. And then we'll reveal all next week, or everyone's scrambling to get on StatCat or something, or opening Rob Mason's books or something to find out in the meantime. But
it was a good game by all accounts. Well, I know it was. It was a good game, Chris. Plenty happening, so people can just bide their time and not dive into the books. It'll be a nice one to talk about next week.
Good stuff. Brilliant. Well, unfortunately, Kelvin couldn't rummage together 50 pence to stick in the meter and join us for the second half of this. But Andrew, thank you very much for staying with me the whole time.
And no, thank you. It's a tough task having to present these on these week pods because there's so much to cover, and then me and Kelvin don't help you or Martin by taking it in all sorts of weird directions. But I made nothing good record, good fun, and hopefully people enjoy listening to us ranting on.
Yes, of course. Let's fingers crossed Martin is back next week, and fingers crossed Kelvin rummages some copper together so he can stick it in, or he can turn the meter around or something, or whatever he needs to do. But thanks again for everyone for listening. Of course, we'll have another of these next week. But all week we'll have a pod every day on How It the Podcast, or check out the Roker Report website for all the reaction to games and all of the build up to games, as well as, of course, our On This Day article, which comes out every day, which probably covers most of what we're talking about. So thanks again for listening, everyone. But from us, it's bye for now.
This podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.